Welcome to the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. Each week, we talk with accomplished content strategy experts to share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 8th episode of the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. I'm really happy today to have Enge with us. Eric is a well-known SEO and content marketing expert, and I brought him on because he's really good at doing research. It kind of connects SEO results and content marketing results to the quality of content. And apropos of that, very recently, just a week or two ago, Stone Temple, Eric's consulting firm, published a piece called The Most Linked Content of 2017. So I want to start off by talking about that. But first, Eric, let me have you tell the folks a little bit about your background, where Stone Temple came from, and how you came to be so interested in research.
Sure. Well, that's a many-faceted question, but I'm originally an engineer by background. Did hardware design for a while, did software engineering for a while, and then eventually got to a place in a company where I ran sort of an in-house startup at a public company that actually was fairly successful, but came time for me to leave that company at a certain point in time, and I started Stone Temple. And we've managed to fast forward all the way from 1956, when I was born, to 1997, in just that minute right there. Stone Temple, though, was originally a business development consulting company. It was just me, and that was great for a while. And I stumbled upon SEO and started doing that. But when I started doing SEO, I had my own publishing companies that were publishing things, and Stone Temple was a little bit of a sideshow until about 2011, actually 2012, when I made it my primary activity and began trying to grow the Stone Temple consulting business. And we went from a company that was originally just me to almost 70 people today, doing SEO, content marketing, and social media consulting for some of the world's largest companies, actually. So that's us.
Well, good. And so I think it's pretty safe to say that's like a meteoric rise in this field, because SEO has been around a while, and I think of you as like an established expert. Like, you're the co-author of arguably the best SEO book out there, The Art of SEO. So that's interesting. Anyhow, you're obviously a quick study. The first thing I wanted to talk about is that that post you just did. You got some data from BuzzSumo, and that resulted in this post about the most linked content of 2017. Can you tell me about what you got from them, what you did with it, and a little bit about the findings?
Yeah, no, happy to. They actually sent me over a poll from one of their databases, and they have a fascinating range of really valuable databases of information. This particular poll was the most linked content, actually the most 5,000 most linked pieces. But there are some things that need to be clarified about what we mean by most linked here. Specifically, they monitor social media. So, and they decide what posts to look at and see how many links they get based on things shared in social media. So it's really the most linked content, or the content that receives the most links from posts that are shared in social media.
Got it.
So you have to unravel that a little bit, but what that means is, links from other kinds of web pages aren't considered, things like that. So it's not a true pure measurement of most linked, but it's certainly a very valid measurement nonetheless. Just understand the limitations. It's not looking at pages that weren't linked from social media somehow.
Got it. And then the findings were kind of not too surprising in some ways. A lot of the big media brands and major news stories dominated. Can you just run through just quickly an overview of the findings, kind of drilling down from there a little bit?
Yeah, no, happy to do that. A very large percentage was major news. We had Me Too news and political news and stuff like that. And, that's something like 70% or 72% of all the posts that were, in the top 1,000 were of that kind. And that's not too surprising, of course. News events do tend to get shared a lot in social media, and then they tend to get a lot of social shares, a lot of visibility, and that makes sense. But what was kind of cool is that there was other kinds of content getting in there, such as research studies that people had published, or in some cases product announcements, and some fairly ordinary looking blog posts managed to get in there. Well, they weren't ordinary blog posts, obviously, but they were blog posts from, not such amazing people. That sounds so negative. And I'm trying to not have it sound negative. They're not like famous people, but they might be well known, but not, not but Jennifer Aniston or Donald Trump,
Right. But I think that's where some of the lessons for, I'm always looking out for the little guy. And that's where some of the lessons for the not major brands and not major media outlets can learn. Like you mentioned research studies were one of the ways that people can stand out, and blog posts from not huge brands. Did you see any characteristics in those that could give people a chance to replicate that kind of result?
Yes, and I'm mindful of the typical audience you have. A lot of the people who listen to your show are smaller businesses, so they don't necessarily have like these large budgets to go spend on $50,000 on a study or something like that. But the reality is that you do need to produce something which really stands out and is different in some fashion. But that can be an opinion piece. So there was one site, I think it was called womensmarch.com, that published a post called "A Day Without a Woman." And it was a post, very much in favor of women's rights and, what would a day like be like without a woman? And it did extremely well in terms of getting links and visibility. And I'd never heard of them before, but they did very, very well. But there's a lot of emotion associated with that topic, of course, and it resonated somehow with an audience that caused a lot of sharing and a lot of linking to result. And then people wanting to write more about the same topic or something like that. So opinion pieces like that can do, really quite well if they strike a nerve or strike a chord, if you will, with the right audiences of people. Of course, studies do well, and that's something that we do quite a bit at Stone Temple with studies. We don't have huge budgets either, but we probably spend more than most small businesses do, or would be willing to. But you can do a study pretty simply. It's like just use SurveyMonkey and do a study of 1,000 people. Do a survey, right? And ask them questions related to your marketplace. And you can get some pretty interesting content that way. Just be wary that you got to put some effort into the questions you put in the survey, so they're likely to come with some sort of interesting aspect to the response.
Gotcha. So you want to validate, you'll have some unique market insight. This is kind of like an opinion piece in that sense, in that you have a unique take on the market, and then you just validate with us some survey data, and then you have like a nice study you can show and publish like that. Well, that's okay. I get that. And one of the interesting things about that study was that it looked both at, it kind of we looked at both social sharing and in links to the content. There was another study that Moz and BuzzSumo did about that showed kind of a lack of correlation between links and shares. And I'm just wondering, I'd love to hear more about that, because obviously both are important, but it seems counterintuitive that they're not, that they don't line up. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, no, happy to tell you about it. So first of all, just to give people a little bit of background, as marketers, we're all interested in things that indicate that we have had great success with a piece of content that we've published. And, it's natural to look at how many social shares did I get? And then separately, how many links did I get? And given that we both think of both of those as measures of success, it's natural to think that they rise together, right? When I get more social shares, I'll naturally get more links. And so Moz and BuzzSumo looked at over 100,000 pieces of content to evaluate whether that was true or not. And they did a kind of correlation study using a thing called Spearman correlation coefficients, but without worrying about exactly what those are. It's the score you get when you measure a correlation coefficient is a number that runs from -1 to 1. So it's just a mathematical way of trying to calculate, in this case, if I get more social shares, do I get more links? And so a +1 score would mean that as I get social shares, I get more links in a way that's linear, that both numbers kind of rise together. A -1 score would mean that they're inverted. When one is rising, the other is going down. They're inversely related to each other. And a score of 0 basically means no correlation whatsoever, right? And in this study that Moz and BuzzSumo did, where they looked over 100,000 articles, where they were looking to see whether there was a correlation between social shares and links, the score they got was 0.01, or for the most part, 0. And that basically says that on an aggregate basis, looking at the way they did, there's no correlation at all. And so, you could sit back and say, no, that can't make sense, right? I don't believe it, right? But now you have to remember a few things. First of all, there's all kinds of content that gets a huge number of social shares, like cute cat pictures and cute baby pictures and cute puppy pictures and stuff like that. Gets an enormous amount of social shares and no links at all, because it just sort of gets a tremendous amount of buzz out of that. And then there's classes of content like academic research that gets lots of links because it gets cited a lot in other academic research, but doesn't tend to get shared socially because that's not where those people do those kinds of things. And so, those are things that are sort of fight against this idea that social shares and links should rise together. But they did find 2 types of content that were strongly correlated when they kind of categorized the content and looked at specific kinds of content. They found, for example, that opinion-forming journalism tends to have a pretty good correlation between social shares and links. And that's sites like the New York Times and things like that. But the problem with that for your average small business is if you put that opinion-forming journalism out there, how many people are going to care? And you're not going to see that correlation until people care. Excuse me. Doesn't mean you can't develop that over time. You can, but you're not going to have it out of the gate. And then the other thing they found that has a strong correlation, we've already talked about it, is research studies. And if you do good quality research and publish that, then there does tend to be a strong correlation between shares and links. And I think when you find these ways of publishing things where you score both well on both shares and links, you probably have a pretty good sweet spot for your business because you get a lot of visibility, right? Because of the social sharing, hopefully among people who care about that kind of content, and the links, right? Which is good for SEO and also gives more visibility. So, the lesson here is, okay, I talked about opinion-forming journalism. That's kind of hard for most small businesses to do. you could probably do studies, and I already talked about the example, through the survey and SurveyMonkey. It's not cheap, okay? It'll cost you, thousands of dollars, but not tens of thousands of dollars. And you can get a pretty good survey together and publish some really interesting content.
Right.
And it's a little bit of a lower entry point for people.
Yeah. And you walk the walk in that regard. You do original research at Stone Temple as well. Like you did, it was fairly recently, you did a survey of personal digital assistants like the Amazon Echo and Google Home and Cortana. Can you tell me about how that study came about and what it got for you?
So well, we're interested in all things digital marketing, and we try very much to be at the cutting edge of the wave. In fact, our kitchen has a large picture of a wave on one of the walls with a person on a surfboard on it, and the metaphor is that Stone Temple is the person on the surfboard, and we're staying in front of the wave, basically. And that's our job, right, as an agency. And so one of the big hot areas is, voice search and smart speakers like Amazon Echo and Google Home that you mentioned. So for us to do a study in this area is natural. And one of the ones we did is we took Siri on the iPhone, Google Assistant running on a smartphone, Google Assistant running on Google Home, Alexa running on the Amazon Echo, and then Cortana, the Cortana app, which we actually did originally on a Windows phone. There was such a thing once upon a time. So we took 5,000 queries and we manually asked, like literally spoke into the phone or the smart speaker, the query for each of those 5 scenarios. So we manually did 25,000 queries, calculated about 40 things about each query in a database and analyzed it. So it's a lot of work. And we published that, and it basically has become the standard reference source for anybody who wants to evaluate, the knowledge level of, any of the personal assistants. So we've been cited in CNET, ZDNet, the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, 20 or 30 major media sources. Consider us the reference for that kind of information. Enormous visibility for us. So
that's really impressive. And are you tracking the results of that? Do you like in media exposure like that? Can you see a growth in whatever it is you hope to increase in leads or prospects coming in the door, or more your site or?
Yeah, one way to talk about it is that we ranked #1 for the phrase digital personal assistants.
Uh-huh.
So that's probably pretty good. Although a little irony of Google and the way the algorithm works and how immature it still is. Personal digital assistants, which sometimes people say instead of digital personal assistants, we don't rank #1 for, but those are actually the same thing. So it's a little odd, but
Interesting, but that's just an ongoing thing in SEO, figuring everything out. Yeah. Well, who won in that in your analysis? We did one gadget or one platform outperform another? Or?
Google Assistant won with the query set that we used.
Okay. Yeah.
So they won. Amazon did very well. Cortana did quite well too.
Oh, interesting. And I'll link to that article in the show notes so that folks can go read the whole thing if they want. But it's a great example of you're walking the walk and actually doing the research and getting the results you'd hope for. So that's
right.
Hey, we're coming up. We're already. I can't believe we've already had 20 minutes go by, and I know you're busy and we've got things to do. So I wanted to ask you one last thing. Just if there's anything last, that while you have the ear of my audience, are there any insights or current, concerns or trends or anything that you'd like to share with my audience that think can help as they develop their content strategy?
Yeah, no, happy to do that. So one of the things that I'm fond of saying when I talk about these kinds of topics is, in fact, I'll be presenting at a conference and I'll walk out on stage and maybe the first thing I'll say is, we're all underinvested in content. All of us, me included, right? Because, and I really think that that's something that is true for almost everybody, because you got to think about, like, you have a website. What are one of the things that you could offer that would be of interest to users, right? Potential customers. And hopefully that's information is one of the things, and information on how to use your product or how to solve the kinds of problems that your product solves or your service solves, and just provide more valuable insight and information to people coming to your site. And the reason this is such a big deal is because it's a big deal to Google. And you want to look at, if you heard the talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence and the things it's going to be used to do, and it's going to change everything forever, and SEO will change and everything else will change. And it's like, okay, just calm down a little bit. You don't have to, that's not what you have to worry about. They're going to use machine learning to do the same things they're already trying to do, which is to find and surface the best possible websites for users. Because when they do a good job of that, that helps them preserve or increase their market share, right? When the Google surface is good, then you're much less likely to text your friends or hop on the phone and, call that friend of yours who's an expert on something, or use Facebook Messenger to ask somebody something, or go to a forum somewhere. You get the answer from Google, and you're happy. And that's the way Google wants it, right? And people don't realize just how much competition Google really faces. And I named the examples of the competition, right? Facebook Messenger, texting, calling a friend, Amazon, right? Where an enormous number of product searches start on Amazon. And these are all dire competitors for Google, and they're on, kind of on assault, under assault from every side. And so machine learning is a tool to improve the quality of their product so much by delivering better and better answers to users. And that's what they're going to use it for. Our job is to help Google out by being the better answer for users.
And the stakes are really high now. There's two things I want to ask you about that. One is that we were talking about personal digital assistants before, and those give you one search result, and much like the snippets that Google gives you. So essentially you're trying to get that coveted snippet result for those. And the other thing is just, it seems like that to get there, you can't just crank out a bunch of content and go after the long tail and blah, 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 that it's got to be super high quality content. Do those two go together?
Absolutely. And that's sort of the extension of what I was just saying prior to in answer to the prior question. So you're absolutely right. So when I'm on a personal digital assistant, like a Google Home, I ask it a question. It reads back an answer. I get one answer, and it's very different than what we have with search prior to today, right? Where I type in my query, I get 10 responses back, and for Google, if the first answer in that environment isn't perfect, but the second or third is the one I want, then they're in great shape. Everybody's happy, the user's happy. But when you have something that's a spoken verbal response back to you, you get one response. And if that isn't the right answer, now the user's unhappy. So this whole program of featured snippets is Google testing and trying to figure out how to make that one answer perfect.
Interesting.
And
do you have a feel for like how they're, because like when you're serving up the 10 blue links, or you have the modern day equivalent of it, there's an opportunity for Google to learn like, oh, a lot of people are clicking on this second result. Do you get the feel, or they must be testing this? Do you have any feel for how they're figuring out which snippets to return?
So what I can tell you is they're using a different algorithm from their main core algorithm. The featured snippet team is clearly doing their own thing, working very independently. And what they do is, if you have a page that they deem to have a very good quality answer on a pure content analysis basis, they may test it and show the featured snippet for it. And then they'll collect data on how it performs, right? And not only just how the individual response for the featured snippet responds, but the page overall. Does it perform better? And if it does, then they'll keep it. And if it doesn't, they'll dump it. But then somebody else comes along and implements something that looks like it's a pretty good answer. They'll test it for a while, and then they'll compare how that one did versus yours, and it will keep the better one of those. So it's very clear that they're doing a lot of dynamic testing around this.
Yeah, that's just how they operate. And yeah. Well, hey, we're coming up on a half hour, Eric, and I know you have another obligation, but thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been super edifying. And like I said, I'll include the links to the studies you mentioned and the things we talked about in the show notes. And yeah, thanks again. Any little final little tidbit for my folks?
Well, I mean, I think we've covered it. I mean, we do more with content, learn how to get featured snippets, experiment with smart speakers, maybe even develop a little app to run on a smart speaker or within a personal assistant. Those are all good things for people to think about doing.
Right, and all ways to solve that being underinvested in content problem. So, well, thanks again, Eric.
All right, thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another content strategy interview.